So there's a report out there that UNLV could be trying to get to the Big Ten.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. This episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Can Notre Dame bounce back without a defensive coordinator? And I've got the head of an NIL collective on today's show to answer the questions that you might have about NIL in today's world. I have many questions about this notion suggested by one Brock Vieira over at Sports Illustrated that UNLV is wanting to get into the Big Ten and that their home game against UCLA in the 2025 season, which is a non-conference battle, is more than just a non-conference game, but an audition of sorts. Quote, UNLV wants to make the jump to the Power 5. It has for some time. It has invested over $30 million into a football complex and have moved its home games from Sam Boyd Stadium, located on the edge of town, to Allegiant Stadium, home of the Raiders, located on the Las Vegas Strip. In the past 2 years, the Rebels made it to the Mountain West Championship, and in 2024, the team finished with 11 wins, a ranking in the top 25, and a win over Cal in the LA Bowl, and then goes on to mention that they just hired Dan Mullen for a record-breaking $17.5 million contract, and the school is giving him the funds to be a national recruiter. End quote. This is such a ridiculous notion. First of all, I have not... This caught me completely off guard. I had to do a triple, quintuple, sextuple, septuple, octuple take on this piece or this idea of taking UNLV and having them go from the Mountain West to the Big Ten. First of all, they just told the Pac-12 no. The rebuilding Pac-12, they just told them, no thanks, we're good enough here in the Mountain West. Do you think they did that because they're holding out for this ploy to get into the Big Ten? I don't think a G5 Power 4 non-conference game is moving the needle. It's certainly more visibility than you get otherwise. I'll grant you that. But this notion that you could go Mountain West to Big Ten, I'll have what he's having, man. I do not see that as being a feasible option for UNLV. That's the first thing. The second thing is he mentions the Big Ten's desire to have a West Coast pod, as if they don't have one already with 4 teams. Now, Mick Cronin, the UCLA basketball coach, has lamented the travel schedule that his team is undergoing in conference play. Who could have seen that coming? Gee, I wonder how we got here. But nevertheless, that does not mean they're going to go Mountain West to Big Ten. Why would the Big Ten go out and say, you know what, we're going to split up the revenue pie even further? Because remember, they had to be convinced of sorts by Oregon and Washington. You do want us. We bring enough to the table to be a half media rights earning member until about 2030 or so. We're worth that. But to say that they would go to the rest of their presidents, the Big Ten, and Tony Petitti, their commissioner, and say, yeah, we're gonna split up the money just a little bit more. You just have to shave a little off the top. You don't need to give up the ice cream and the banana or even the whipped cream. Just half of the cherry. Not even the full cherry. Just give up half the cherry here so that we can add UNLV. I understand the appeal of wanting to have a presence in Las Vegas. The Big Ten in the future, I believe, has plans to have some conference championships there. There are a lot of appealing things about Las Vegas. It's a growing market, popular place to be. Sure, I get all of that, but not for the Big Ten. There's no additive value of bringing in UNLV. And they've had a great football run over the last couple of seasons. They have not had anywhere near the level of success and established brand identity to be a Big Ten university. And there's nothing about UNLV that feels Big Ten, right? They're an up and cut. This would be the equivalent to me of taking Tulane and saying, oh, they should be in the Big Ten. No, they're a candidate to go in the rebuilt Pac-12 or to form a super G5 conference or be in the Big 12 or ACC one day. Like, that's the next step. But we don't see teams make jumps in realignment 2 steps up the ladder. That doesn't happen. Utah went from Mountain West to Pac-12, and now they're Big 12. Utah would be a team that I think the Big Ten could go after one day if they have the desire. I don't think Utah has any dead set desire to stay in the Big 12 forever and ever and ever. It's just any port in a storm, and that was the best port available once the Pac-12 collapsed. But remember, this is a Big Ten that said, nah, we're good with Stanford and Cal, which feel far more, think whatever you want about those athletic departments, those feel far more like Big Ten universities than a UNLV or even a Utah, for instance. For the Big Ten, if they were going to make any sort of move, it would be Notre Dame or it would be nobody. Because remember, the Big Ten and SEC financially and on the field, Paul Feinbaum said very recently, finally came around and admitted, because the evidence is just overwhelming, the Big Ten runs college football right now. They don't need to go out and make a move. They don't need the perception of strength. There is nothing about this that would make sense for the Big Ten. Would it make sense for UNLV? Yeah, of course. Of course it would. I mean, UNLV has to feel pretty good about where their athletics are at, because Las Vegas is a growing place to be, and they were courted by the Pac-12, and I don't think the Pac-12 is done trying to get them to be a chess piece in realignment. And the Mountain West really wants them to stay. It's good to feel wanted and not just there, not just existing in a conference, because there are plenty of universities that feel that way all over the country. But the only school, team, however you want to look at it, but it's a school that the Big Ten would ever go after is Notre Dame. I just cannot see any other school being worthwhile here. So that's how we begin today's show. The offseason is so incredibly back. It's so incredibly back, folks. Don't overlook the idea of UNLV going to the Pac-12. I know that they asked her out and she said no, but I don't know if it was a no, don't ever talk to me again, or no, I'm good with what I have going right now. Just be on the lookout for that. Don't be on the lookout for UNLV to start to make ploys to get into the Big Ten. That's not something they're capable of plotting right now. They could get to the Pac-12, that's it. The Big 12 hasn't even expressed a serious desire. And if you're not courted by that particular conference, you're not going to be wanted by a bigger one in the Big Ten. So, end of rant. Notre Dame, though, speaking of the Fighting Irish, just lost the national championship game. That's painful. And another painful reality is coming their way. First, a reminder, this episode brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule, which I can relate to, can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. That is what they're all about. And signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. That's 2 days, and you'll be ready to go, off and bettering yourself. That is something we should all consider. Plus, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege. Enter promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege. Enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code SPACE80. Can Notre Dame get back to the national championship game quickly? I mean, yes, but it's going to be exceedingly difficult. Tyler Wojciak, Locked On Fighting Irish, here to join me. How hard do you think it will be without Al Golden, their now departed defensive coordinator?
Look, it was going to be hard even if Al Golden decided to stay, because it's just really hard to get back to this point. It's something that I've been thinking about. I brought this up on my show too. I've been thinking about that quote from Dan Campbell a lot lately. And he was talking about what his message to the team was after they lost to the 49ers in the NFC Championship game prior to this season. And his message was, this feeling is going to hurt, And it's going to be twice as hard to get back next year because you never know what types of injuries you're going to deal with. And sure enough, the Lions ended up dealing with a ton. And you got to have that same level of hunger to get back to this point. So it's not just Notre Dame. It's whoever gets to this position, especially kind of early on in their coach's tenure. Like, this is only Marcus Freeman's third year. But the way that I've sort of kind of reconciled with everything is that this is sort of the natural progression of things. You look at a lot of the past champions. Look at Michigan. Right? They got to the college football playoff 3 years in a row. They got smoked by Georgia. Then they choked a game away against TCU. And then they finally broke through and won. Georgia had to lose a national championship before they ultimately won. And they had to lose to Alabama multiple times before they got that monkey off their back. Ohio State has been in the playoff a bunch of times. They finally broke through. This is just what happens. And I do think Notre Dame will eventually get back, but who knows when.
I look at the Irish, and I thought they hit their ceiling this year. I picked them to win every college football playoff game. You and I talked about how at the end of the regular season, they were quietly playing some of the best football in the country because it was coming against Army or Navy or USC, but they were doing a lot of things really well. But I went 4-0 picking Notre Dame in the playoff. That includes the national championship game. 4-0 against the spread with those picks as well. So this was exactly what I expected for Notre Dame once the playoff arrived. No more Riley Leonard, no more Al Golden. There's some other losses as well. Xavier Watts has gone to the NFL, right? Like, there are a number of pieces to replace here for Notre Dame. What does their 2025 outlook look like to you?
I mean, they're still extremely talented on both sides of the ball. They bring back several key starters, like Jeremiah Love is going to be back next year, healthy, hopefully, coming off that knee injury that he suffered against USC. Like, he just wasn't the same player in the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, he could have a potential Heisman level season if he's able to stay healthy throughout the year. I think they're going to have, if not the best offensive line in the country, it's going to be close because they have so much talent on that group. And I guess one of the benefits of the injuries that they had to deal with this season is that backups came in and they were really good too. So they're going to be older. They're going to be a lot more experienced because that was the biggest knock on them going into the season. They had no experience. Then they all had really good seasons. They added Malachi Fields in the transfer portal, Will Pauling as well to help out at wide receiver. So we're going to find out who the quarterback is going to be. That's obviously a huge question, but they got a bunch of talent in that room. But then on defense, they've recruited so well. The linebackers are really good. They're going to have another great secondary. I do have some questions about the interior, the defensive line. But look, every team is going to have some questions going into another season. But the way that Marcus Freeman has recruited at the high school level and considering how aggressive they've been in the transfer portal, they should be able to make it back to the playoff next year. And then once you're in the playoff, anything can happen.
I love more than anything that I can ask you this next question, Tyler, but week 1, they go to Coral Gables to battle the one, the only Miami Hurricanes in one of the marquee matchups of the early college football slate, week 0, 1, and 2. And not only do we know that that game's happening, we've got a line on that game. It's January, and our friends at FanDuel, our college football sickos like you, like me, and everybody else, Notre Dame minus 2.5. When you don't know who the starting quarterback's going to be for the Fighting Irish, and you do for Miami, and it is being played on Miami's home turf, is that an appropriate line?
I mean, I guess. It's so hard to tell this early on. I will say Notre Dame exercised some demons in that stadium because they did not have a very good history of playing in Miami, but they were able to finally get a win there when they beat Penn State in the Orange Bowl. So maybe that bodes well for how they'll do next season. But something that I've been thinking about, coming off the longest season ever for Notre Dame, how are we going to feel about those week 1 games? It's still going to be exciting, right? Because we're going to have to go through this super long offseason. We're all going to be really excited to watch college football again. But just think about how different the season feels. The Texas A&M Notre Dame game feels like an eternity ago. So long.
Yeah,
and now it's a little bit different because we had not experienced a run like this in the playoff. But I just think that everyone's mindset and their approach to these games is going to feel a little bit different now that we've kind of gone through one version of the 12-team college football playoff. Those early season games, they're still going to have some juice, obviously, but I feel like it's not going to feel like life or death like it used to feel in the past.
Yeah, I think that's the downside of the 12-team playoff is it's not always life or death. I mean, 2 of the biggest regular season upsets this year happened to Notre Dame and Ohio State. Who? Let me think about it for a moment. Yes, we're both just playing for the national championship. But, look, here's the bright side of it, though. With the national championship ending earlier this week, the time between the last college football game and the next one is slightly less than it was before. That is the optimist in me coming out there. But for Notre Dame, you can be optimistic or pessimistic with this response. Do you have a bigger question mark about the offense working in a new quarterback or the defense working in a new defensive coordinator?
I would say offense, because I feel like they're going to promote from within at defensive coordinator. It seems like the most logical option is to promote their secondaries coach, Mike Mickens. He's been with the program since 2020. Him and Marcus Freeman are extremely tight. He has built Notre Dame secondary into one of the best in the country, which used to be by far the program's biggest weakness. And the fact that they were able to lose Benjamin Morrison, who could go in the first or second round of the NFL draft, and just reload with true freshmen and other really talented players like Adon Schuler. I mean, he turned Xavier Watts into an All-American, and that guy was recruited as a wide receiver coming out of high school. So I feel good about where the defense is. Plus, Notre Dame's defense has been so good for years. They have really lacked a truly elite quarterback. And, I don't know if that quarterback is on the roster. People have high hopes for CJ Carr, who's a freshman right now. Maybe he is the guy to sort of take them to that next level, but I got to see it to believe it. So until then, I'm going to have a little bit more questions about the offense.
Did you have a problem kicking the field goal down 16 in the fourth quarter with 9.5 minutes to go?
In the moment, yeah, but not as much as Twitter did. I actually don't think it was as idiotic as some people made it out to be.
I am in the same camp. I understand the response of how can you be doing it? You need 2 possessions and whatnot. But just think about it from this standpoint. It's a short field goal that you should be able to make, first of all, with a kicker who's been good in the postseason. And second of all, can you make up 13 points in 9.5 minutes? If it were 6.5 minutes, all right, maybe not. But 9.5 minutes? I thought that was a long time. Like, I understand the criticism of it. I just didn't think it was, the way it was flying around online, which was, as you alluded to, this is the worst decision in the history of all time. And it's like, not really. If they failed to get the touchdown, then they were going to be in the exact same position they ended up being. But if they make the field goal, kick it off, their defense got a 3-and-out, and then they scored a touchdown, and then they would have been down 6.
Right. Just think about how different that last drive for Ohio State is if they had made that field goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was more upset with the play calling on first, second, and third downs leading up to that kick, because like the run on first down with Riley Leonard, everyone in the world knew it was coming, and he looked so gassed by that point. And then on second down, they just threw a fade to Mitchell Evans. Like, they haven't done that all year. And then on third down, Riley Leonard missed Jeremiah Love for a walk-in touchdown. So I was more upset with that sequence of events than I was about the actual decision to kick the field goal. But, it is what it is, especially in a game like that when so many other things went wrong. But a situation like that, it's always going to be met with a pretty strong response.
Based on our T-shirts today, Tyler, everyone get ready for our new podcast upcoming, Charcoal and Gray. Tyler Wojciak, Locked On Fighting Irish. Appreciate it as always. And you're going to appreciate what's coming up next. Do you want to peek behind the NIL curtain? I've got the head of a Power 4 collective right here on the show. First, though, a reminder, this episode brought to you by Game Time. Do you want to go to NFL playoff games? Do you want to go to college football playoff games? There are already 11-point spreads available for week 0 and 1 in the college football regular season in 2025. Do you want to go to those games? Game Time is the place to go. Game Time makes it even easier to create unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters. Being there, experiencing the moments in person. I've used Game Time myself, and let me tell you, it's easy. You find tickets with great prices. You've got all the features you want a ticketing site. Game Time has it available. Seat views before you buy, on-time ticket delivery, they've got it all. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Well, this is a treat for you all because you get a peek behind the NIL curtain, specifically at Louisville, who have won 9 or more games in Jeff Brohm's first 2 years for the first time in over a decade. That's pretty darn good. And Louisville attempts to be as competitive as they can in a lot of different areas. Dan Furman runs Louisville's collective in the NIL space. So, Dan, thanks for joining the show. And I just want to start with that. What does that mean? What you run Louisville's collective? What do you do?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. First off, I appreciate you having me, but ultimately, as head of an NIL collective like that hat, you wear a much different hat day to day, right? And some days that means helping our coaches oversee talent acquisition and talent retention. Some days that means working with our major gift donors to help set the budget for the team for the following year, or even just meet payroll month to month, right? So there's a lot of things that fall into that bucket, but ultimately you're building a brand. You're building a brand around 502 Circle and NIL and in Louisville that can impact a lot of kids and have a lot of opportunities for our student athletes and for our fans to enjoy what Louisville football and Louisville men's basketball are all about. So we've had a lot of fun with it, man. And it's the one thing we've tried to do is be competitive as anybody in the country in the NIL space. I think being number one in the portal the last couple of years, you get that credibility, but at the same time you realize like, hey, this game's not slowing down anytime soon, and it's been fun to watch college football continue to evolve. And we just saw a shootout in the national championship game where you had 2 high-powered NIL rosters that were going out there to clash in the national championship game. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm excited to see what the future brings.
You have this changing dynamic in college football that creates a lot of negative press, negative attention. NIL has, I think on the whole, a very negative connotation because of collectives. Like that, let's call what it is. Like, people don't like collectives. What do you think those people get wrong?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's a lot of things, right? I think a lot of people, they view a collective as just, we're out here like slime balling it, right? Trying to find ways to get kids as much money as possible. But what a lot of people don't realize is what kind of process is behind the scenes, what's actually going on from a day-to-day standpoint, and how we're evaluating talent, how we're finding players, how we're cutting some of the deals that we're doing throughout the course of the year to make sure that our teams are better and our head coaches are in a position to win, right? So I think there's a lot more to it than what the fans and what college football and enthusiasts see on the surface, right? But then also the one thing that a lot of people are becoming more and more aware of is talent retention, right? Being able to make sure that you're negotiating those deals mid-season to try and find a way to keep those guys who are making plays every Saturday.
During the season, you have to negotiate those deals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're typically 6 games in, before you're starting to have those conversations, but you're literally you're evaluating these guys after 1 week, right? On what makes sense and who's going to fill the roster moving forward. So there's a lot of moving parts, but ultimately, as in anything in life, college football has become a path for guys to earn, right, and have opportunities to make money. So at the end of the day, when schools and collectives are setting this opportunity up for their players, they have to see an ROI as well. So we've got to be aware of what the product looks like that we're putting on the field, and we feel like we're in a really good spot. Coach Brohm's done an unbelievable job of bringing guys in here that make a lot of sense for what we do, and I think we continue to bring in the right guys and get rid of the right guys, right? And it's all about building that culture, and it's hard to do in college football nowadays, man, because you got 40, 45 new guys every time the cycle turns. So it's a really interesting concept that if your NIL collective can help you get out in front of it, man, you'll have a lot of success, and it'll definitely increase your chances of winning, especially in a conference like ours where there's a lot of opportunity to sit at the top and find ways to compete against some of the other teams trying to get in that playoff.
So collectives, I'm sure most people are aware, but if you're not, are separate from the university, right? It's its own independent entity. But I imagine you don't have zero communication or interaction with Coach Brohm or any other coach that wants to, tap into the NIL resources. How does that dynamic work when it's not something that is university sponsored right now? And there could be another change that I'll ask you about later, but what is that like to be separate from the university but involved in putting together a roster and acquiring players and figuring out how much money you have to give to which guys?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the biggest thing, right? Is the NCAA doesn't allow us to be in-house. So you have to do everything third party, which for us can cause a little bit of a communication issue every here and there. But like we've got to be on top of our A game when we're talking with our coaches, helping understand what the roster dynamics are, and understanding who's performing and who's not. And we're not necessarily, especially here at Louisville, like, I'm not sitting there breaking down conversations about actual dollars and cents with them. I'm trying to gather as much information as I can so that I can make educated decisions when the time comes. That way it keeps our coaching staff and those guys out of the clear from an NCAA standpoint. But then it also allows us to operate with no bias in the situation, right? So we've got a pretty good setup and a pretty good situation, but at the end of the day, we're always trying to find ways to improve and ultimately having that communication with coaches, understanding the system, understanding what their goals are and what they're trying to do position by position. I think it goes a long way. And I think it, there's instances where you rotate a ton of defensive linemen. So, okay, we're not going to go get, 2 studs and then not have enough guys to fill out that depth that they like, right? So you have to understand what they're trying to do and what the approach is. And that's another thing that I think a lot of fans across college football don't necessarily understand, right? Is that nowadays it's a little deeper than just dollars and cents. It's trying to find ways to give yourselves a competitive advantage. And that's what we try and help our programs do on a day in, day out basis.
People don't like the purely dollars and cents component. Some people, right? More old school fans or even new school fans that say, this isn't what college sports is supposed to be. This isn't what it's meant. This isn't what it felt like when I was growing up or when I played or when I was at the school. Pay for play is something that has been tossed around in college sports forever. It's been around college sports. It's certainly more pronounced now that NIL and whatnot has become legal. But what is your response to those critics that say, just having a straight pay-for-play model is not what NIL was originally intended to be and is not good for the sport?
Yeah, I think, like a lot of people at the time, I was probably in that camp for a second, right? In the beginning of this whole thing when NIL was getting started and it wasn't as mature and refined as it is now. But I think that schools they've matured their operation. They've been creative, been entrepreneurial, and they've tried to find ways to put their program on the cutting edge of what's going on in college football. So as this has continued to develop, I will say the industry looks a lot different now than it did a few years ago when this whole thing first started. And look at the ratings, right? Like look at the opportunities these athletes are getting to go play on a national stage. And I think it's been pretty cool to watch the growth of college football over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think it's in a better spot. It's in a healthier spot than it's ever been. Yeah. Are there some issues from a tampering standpoint? Do we want to refine some of the portal windows? Yeah, absolutely. Like all those things are a part of the conversation. But when you really break it down, man, it's a pretty good product that is going out on the field right now. And it's a lot of fun to watch. You're seeing conferences separate themselves from others, which is good for the game. I think you're going to continue to have teams that step up in conferences like the SEC and the Big 12 that want to be contenders. And the more and more that you invest in the talent you're putting out on the field, the better the opportunity you have to go win championships. So it is more of a pro model, but at the end of the day, I think fans and honestly, let's call it what it is, donors from school to school have something to look forward to as college football continues to evolve.
We might have to agree to disagree on the changing and evolution of conferences as being a great thing for college football, but
I'm not necessarily saying that's the best thing for college football because it is. I just think that it's really interesting because I don't love the concept of teams jumping from here to there or conferences solidifying themselves, but I do think that it gives, like our conference, for example, like they've rolled out success initiatives that the more you invest in football and the more that you win, the more you get from a distribution standpoint. So I think this conferences are trying to find ways to be creative and put themselves back at the top. So, for a school like Louisville, I think that gives us a unique opportunity to go maximize some of the revenue opportunities we have in football. I think it'll keep growing too.
Last thing for you, Dan, and I appreciate you taking the time for the audience out there and whatnot. With the House settlement that is looming, that is essentially going to give a payroll for universities, what happens to collectives then?
I think it's going to be really interesting. And I think if you ask that question to 100 people, you'd probably get 100 different answers. I think some people think that collectives are going away completely. Some people think it's going to be 50-50. Some people think collectives are going to be more and more important. And I try not to be biased from this question, right, or in this situation. But when you really break it down, if a school, just like we've been doing for the last few years, right? Like schools do have a specific cap space through the collective, but even if they have to, man, they're finding other ways to generate revenue and get their players opportunities to earn, because ultimately it's an arms race. It's just like everything in college sports. When it was facilities and scholarships and all the flashy things that came before Alston money and before NIL, as this continues to grow, people are always going to try and find an advantage on and find a way to win, right? And give themselves an edge over the team on the other side of the football. So in this situation, I do think that, yes, there's going to be a cap space. There's a lot of conversation.
But is that going to be separate? Is that going to be a separate amount of money from what NIL collectives are currently doing, where they raise their own money to attract players or retain players?
So, yes. I don't think every school is going to be fortunate enough to be able to pull that off, to be honest.
To have both.
Yeah, exactly. There's going to be schools who are supplementing, they're going to be moving all their fundraising efforts just to make sure they can hit that cap, hit that 20.5 every year, right? But in our situation or some other school situations, you're going to want to maximize the cap opportunity and then still find opportunities for NIL on the outside of that, to make sure that your football and men's basketball programs especially are funded in a way that they can go compete at the highest level. And I think that, especially schools in the SEC and the Big Ten, they're already finding ways to do that. And I think that as this continues to grow, schools like Louisville and schools in our conference are going to be as competitive as possible, trying to find opportunities for their athletes to continue to get better, earn more money, and go out on the field and compete with the best programs in the country. So you're going to see a lot of that. And so I do think there is a space for NIL collectives moving forward. A lot of ADs like to use the term like fringe benefits, right? So that's going to be an interesting model. But a lot of people got to remember, most of these schools that you're talking about from a Power 4 standpoint, or I would just say a lot of them are public universities, right? So there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of discussion around the publicity of some of the earnings. Like, what does all that look like? What does Title IX look like? What do these things look like over the next 18 to 24 months as college athletics goes through a really interesting, time of growth? So I think it's going to be interesting. And I think that the more that you can privatize and put in a front office type setting, the better you're going to be. And I think that's where collectives can come into play to create opportunities for programs across the country.
Dan Furman, president of the 502 Circle. That is Louisville's NIL collective. Appreciate you letting me pick your brain today on the show. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.